But before I think we start with Aleppo and the discussion, I would like to raise some more general questions, because what we have seen and what we have heard about Aleppo was on the one hand really shocking, but on the other hand, you know, you presented ways and ideas of what can be done and how a destroyed city could be, can be renewed or whatever. My idea in this afternoon is to go a little bit back to what happened already in the last years. You know, if you look at the destruction of the Buddha statues in Bamiyan, in the Bamiyan Valley already in 2001, or if you look at the destruction of Timbuktu and the tomb of Esquire in Mali, first by the rebels of the Tuareg and later by Al-Qaeda in 2012. The destruction of the historic city in Nimrud, Iraq, in the early spring of this year, and by the Islamic State some weeks ago and later Palmyra. So if we look at that, I think we have to raise a question: what have these people in mind? What is it? We had that discussion yesterday. What is it what makes people to destroy heritage? Why world heritage? And you have mentioned that the material heritage is part of identity and is part of the identity of people. Is it that these people want to destroy identity? But then we can reconstruct the building. So what's that? So, and what can be done, and this was a question I raised before we started, what can be done to prevent this kind of destruction? Is there anything what can be done? And if not, you know, shall we sit and wait? The next disaster, the next disaster, the next disaster? So I think at the moment we are in a situation that we have to raise questions on the development, even though this development is not new. If you look at the 80s in the last century, it was Latin America with similar developments. So it is not a new phenomenon, but it is a phenomenon which is worldwide, can be seen worldwide, and what I find important that we think about it and reflect a little bit upon that before we go into the presentation you have already shown us. I would like to introduce, I have introduced Professor Nagler, Mr. Wessling, and Professor Balla. I would like that you introduce yourself. You are Carola Simon and Lena Wimmer. And as far as I know, you have prepared one slide.
Well, we prepared 5 minutes.
Okay.
But now it's
okay, then I think you should present yourself so that everybody knows where you come from, who you are, and what is your interest, you know, to attending and to joining us here in this meeting today.
Well, as you know, we are part of the Friends from Aleppo, as already Professor Nagler and Mr. Wessling mentioned. And inside, we founded a working group called Rebuilding Aleppo. I think it's okay.
It's okay.
No? No?
You take it.
Thank you. We founded the group with Professor Fanza, Carola Simon, and me in Berlin. And we are looking for strategies how we can deal with the information, like the archive, to really be able to think about rebuilding Aleppo. And one of the main goals or main important things we discovered is that most of the knowledge that is inside the city is actually not written. So all the craftsmen, they know how to build or rebuild the city, but it's not written. So when we already have the archive, or we will have in the future, we still are in need of people who are able to rebuild also Aleppo. And this is one very concrete part of the working group that we try to collect now and to get in contact with experts in Aleppo who are spread around the world to collect the memories and to realize or make it possible to really rethink Aleppo, to really give a chance to rebuild Aleppo with details. So I'm really talking about like an architect. When I talk about rebuilding, I mean details. And we believe that only craftsmen are able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we have one big vision. We would like to reconstruct Aleppo, or we would like to rethink the whole city of Aleppo. That means the old city in dialogue with the new city of Aleppo.
And all the informal settlements.
Yes.
Yeah.
But how?
I think, yes, we have already thought about different strategies. But, yeah.
Therefore, we will also launch in February or March idea competition. So we hope that there are some ideas somewhere, and so we are just starting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also we are organizing charity performance, which will be taking place in Berlin in February next year. And we will invite experts from Syria, from Aleppo, and Germany and abroad. And also we would like to present an exhibition about the past, the present, and the future of Aleppo. And the ideas which will be developed in the competition, they will be discussed, presented and discussed during a workshop which will take place in Beirut or Gaziantep in June next year. So we have a lot of ideas to reconstruct Aleppo. So yes, and we are looking forward to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this introduction. I would like to introduce now over there Professor Schipper. He is from the University of Vienna. Some of you have already listened and followed his introduction to the Hague Convention. So he is also talking about war. He is also talking about or thinking his background is working with destruction, heritage destruction in war. He is, I introduce him a little bit. He is a professor in the university in Vienna, and he is also being chair of the Competence Center for Cultural Heritage and Cultural Property Protection. Many activities, shall I mention all these? Okay. Not. So I think it is up to you. Yeah, it is up to you. Maybe you can give us, concerning the discussion we have now in this afternoon, and based on what we have seen about Aleppo, maybe you can give us some ideas, some reflections upon the question, why it is needed, why it is so important that we, on the one hand, raise these questions, but on the other hand, also find solutions.
Well, you raised the question why the destruction occurs in such a way, intentional, in such an amount, to 100%. And what can be done to prevent such destruction? I would say nothing can be done to prevent destruction. The point is the destruction of property that we are now facing is one of the major goals of the conflict. Yeah? Yesterday, Markus Hilgert finished his conclusions with integration, cultural property protection as integration and reconciliation. And the point is that the intentional destruction that we face strives for ending integration and preventing reconciliation. So it's at least a crucial tactical measure, the destruction of cultural property, if not one of the main strategies of conducting conflict. Yeah? So if you want to prevent the destruction also of cultural property, you have to prevent the conflict. Yeah? And basically the conflict that is now going on in Syria has been analyzed. The picture is blurred, who is fighting against whom, but the roots we know about. Yeah? We know about the roots of the conflict in Syria and Iraq, about the competing tribes, interest groups, religious groups, and about only one party being in power, oppressing the other parties. The Sunnis were in power during the period of Saddam Hussein, then the Shiites were in power, oppressing the Sunnis, and so on and so forth. I mean, we basically know why the conflict occurred. Yeah? And letting the conflict unfold, letting, so to say, the war be unleashed, yeah? From a certain point onwards, it is impossible to prevent the destruction of cultural property because it is combined with ethnic cleansing, with striving for ethnic cleansing. Yeah? The cleansing of various regions in the area of conflict, the cultural cleansing of various regions as a way to total ethnic cleansing, preventing any option of reconciliation afterwards.
Thank you. Last but not least, I would like to introduce two of our students, World Heritage Studies students. I know them both. We had a wonderful conference in Bonn when we were discussing the topic of heritage and sustainability. We were not discussing the question of war and terror in this conference, but at the same time, we were thinking about the topic, what can be done, you know, what are our goals, on the one hand in heritage studies, but on the other hand in the heritage protection, you know, what is behind the World Heritage Convention? It is the outstanding universal value. This cannot be the reason for destroying all. You know, we have Mayis and Ellie. Maybe you can give some points of your vision on why you are here and what is your perception on our topic.
Yes. First, thanks for invitation. It was really, really interesting to follow the developments in Syria. So I am coming from Armenia, again a very, very conflicting country, which has lost about 90% of heritage during the Armenian genocide and after. And then in this region we could see very clearly the ethnic cleansing, the cultural heritage destruction, with the intention to destroy of whatever mention of Armenians ever living in that region. And and after 100 years, because this year was the 100 years of the Armenian genocide memorial, of course, it's like it's a very, very, very difficult question, even if it is needed to rebuild the heritage, for example, in that region, because we already speak about 8 million Armenians living outside of Armenia, about only 3 million who live inside. We speak about Armenians who identify themselves being French with Armenian origins, which is totally true, being American with Armenian origins, being Russians with Armenian origins. So, I mean, I think the most challenging part is the social processes that going next to the heritage destruction, because even now in Syria we are speaking about Syrians leaving the country. We are speaking about the Syrians who are migrating, who are running away. Of course they are running away, they have to. And rebuilding the city, of course, it's fantastic, it's very important, but the question is how how authentic the heritage even will be after that. If the people will go back, for example, no any Armenian now, if you change the Armenian cities back to their previous condition, no one will go back nowadays anymore. And this is what I see as one of the most challenges. It's the social changes, it's the cultural changes, it's of course the Syrians who live in Germany, they are partially losing their traditions, losing their habits. This is also part of the integration process. I don't see it necessarily as something bad, but it's just the reality. And the question, of course, how alive the heritage is once the people are not living there. Even if the buildings were exactly the same, like how alive the heritage is, how authentic the heritage is. So these are also the areas of my interest, of the research interest, but also, what worries me, mainly.
Really?
So I guess I tend to agree with Mayis about the built heritage, which makes sense because we come from the social science background. It seems most people are from the architecture background, so but I guess my focus would be more important with the intangible heritage, and so the traditions and everything that's passed down, which is why I also agree with Professor Schipper with that I'm not sure if too much can be done, but if maybe in a few generations, if we start with educating the youth and children and kind of change it from there, and instead of, teaching them, oh, you should hate these people because, they're different than you, but instead of, we're all the same, we have similar backgrounds, and that if we can start with the kids, then hopefully
So thank you very much. I think now we should start with raising the questions, because I find it very important that we reflect upon the situation here. Is there anything which can be done preventing this kind of destruction, and what?
You mentioned only these last, more or less, demolitions of the last 10 years. We can go back centuries. And of course, I'm old enough to have in my mind all the ruins of Germany. And it is obvious that both the Germans and the Allies, they bombed the cities with a Baedeker in the pocket. And it's true. And it's now one can follow it. One can have now a lot of sources in archives where you can find that's really discussed. It's not only that it's happened, that it was discussed. And of course, if we look even deeper in our past, it was always the troops, they came and burned down the cities. Because they want to erase not only they want to erase also more or less the memory of these cities. They should be totally destroyed. When Alexander the Great went to Persepolis, of course he was more or less he won, and he was a big emperor, and then after 3 days he burned down the city. Because he doesn't want to have this sign of former power. So it's a very, very, very long history. And of course, we have this Hague Convention, but it doesn't matter. And now our UNESCO, I have heard that they discussed whether Aleppo should now lose its... but I cannot understand it. The heritage, the status, they should lose its status, like Dresden, because. So I think that is a very desperate situation in any case, and of course we can. And that is, of course, I think. For me, it's a question how one can more or less renew this kind of identity. We know it in the example of Warsaw. When the Russian came to Warsaw, 1 month after, the Polish people came back into the city already in March 45. And they, from the starting point, they built up the city again. And of course, they fought because of the identity of the Polish nation to reconstruct the old city. However, how good it's done, it's a World Heritage Site, not because it's done because of its value as urban fabric, but as a value of a reconstructing of memory and a reconstructing of identity. It's another question. I think it's another question when a city like Dresden built up the inner city 50 years later, after a second destruction, 47, when they more or less demolished all the ruins. And then now, and 50 years later, they more or less, even the last traces beneath the ground, they demolished because they built up these very, very huge 2-story high parking areas beneath the area. So that is quite another question. And I think the most, in all reconstruction questions, one has always to ask yourself for whom you will do it.
Thank you very much. Professor Nagler, you mentioned capacity building in your slide, and you showed us a very, very interesting picture on capacity building, on training, on education. Do you think that this could be at least a strategy, not in avoiding, but at least in raising awareness, constructing empowerment?
Thank you for this question, but I would like to go back to the first question.
Okay, then do it.
Okay. I guess it's even worse. You know, as architects, we wish and like to do the good, and we are convinced. And at the same time, we are calling the devils and the evils to come. When we get into a given structure and try to improve it, we make it better, we enhance it. At the same time, we create segregation, dividing the poorer from the richer, and this is our thing to do. It's even worse. So you can't ask an architect how not to do the better, not to do from his point of view, from his skills to do the better. But at the same time, we create values, we create at the very end identities. And this is, so we to be honest, we only start building these targets where they aim and hit on that. So for me is very much the question what to do right now. What can we do right now? Since we don't know when this conflict stops. And we need to do something. We need to be prepared. And we need to collect all the tools, what is needed when the starting point comes, what to do. And for me, the question is a little bit, since we don't know what kind of destruction, what amount of destruction we will be facing in 1, 2, 3 years, we don't, in 5 years, we don't know. I think we have to collect and to discuss what is of value, not matter the amount of destruction. And the first example was given by Inken, Bala. The old town of Warsaw was destroyed by our fathers and uncles, house by house by house by house, putting holes into the walls, putting dynamite, and destroying house by house the old downtown of Warsaw. And what they did is they built up again, house by house, and not only the facades and the roofs, but also the interior ground floor plans of the houses. Therefore, it became World Heritage Site. Because of this total reconstruction, and the idea behind this was also mentioned by Inken Bala, because it's the reconstruction of identity by building. But I also think of Freiburg. It was also heavily destroyed after the war. And as far as I know, it was the very first time that the fathers and mothers of the city decided the ground floor plan of the city. That is a document. And that's the monument. That means not the houses. Okay, some of the houses were left and could be restored somehow. Yeah? But the ground floor plan is a monument So when you go there today, more or less, you have the impression of being in historical medieval spaces, because they simply rebuilt the streets and the spaces, with some exceptions, of the former times. But they did it with housing typologies and with aesthetics of the 50s. So you go there, you have the impression the space is all about is, or it's a medieval town, beautiful. But when you look around, you see houses of the 50s, with the aesthetics of the 50s. And this is great. And you could add with this idea to define what is a monument, what is the highest value. Yeah? You can rebuild at least the basic structure. I just gave a lecture about typology and what is a module. So you have the typology, it is given, and you build it with even modern architecture. And this is more or less the idea behind it. And we have to discuss all these kind of modules and to discuss strategies. I would like to come to your proposal doing competitions. I'm in many juries. And I'm very much trained about it. And I right now to think about this would be horror for me to start a competition. Yeah, to start a competition means to clarify the strategies first. Because when you ask architects, they always, and also planners, they always have the tendency to do it better, as I mentioned. They do it better and they say, as Sharon said, looking on Berlin, oh, this is, let's say, mechanisch aufgelockert, mechanically scattered, so we can do something new about it. And he invented a big plan, Kollektivplan, who harmed the development of the city of Berlin for 20 years, 25 years, bis in die 70, actually until today. So, competition and asking people to be creative at that point is not, for me, not the point at all when you like to compete. Competition is always good, but not an architecture competition. Compete about the strategies, such as I mentioned, to find out what are the appropriate approach when you think about reconstruct, rebuild, or whatever Aleppo. So just as a topic of competition and architects. Wow, that's a competition. I almost drive crazy thinking about that.
Thank you very much. You forgive me.
I think it's a very good comment, because I also believe in that. And so the first challenge from the competition is actually, what should be the question? What should be the question raised by us when we talk about rebuilding or restructuring Aleppo? So this is actually one part of it, because raising up the right question is already a big challenge, I think. Because it starts, what's the client? Who will be the client in Aleppo? Who will be the constructor? Who will be the user? We don't know that yet. We don't know, will it be Assad? Will it be someone new we don't know yet? ISIS? Who knows? So, and therefore, this question, who will be the client for Aleppo?
But there are values beyond the question of client.
Of course, yes.
So think of Freiburg, the example. I don't care who works within this monument.
Yes.
And rebuilding this sense. I don't care. The bank or the church or the municipality or whatever. So competing strategies, okay. But at that point, please don't ask architects to be creative to rebuild the city.
No,
please
it's
not.
far beyond.
No, because
Okay, then maybe it's just a misunderstanding.
yes, because also I would like to add something. Also, I think before we would like to launch the competition or whatever, we have this panel discussion with experts. So, and this... No, okay. But we, with the, I don't know, then with the...
Syrian people, I mean...
Yes, of course.
Maybe will be involved again.
Of course. And this is our aim, to involve Syrian architects and also urban planners and historians. But these strategies, which will be developed during the panel discussion, they will be implemented into the competition. I would also.
But very last advice, to design a brief is the most important thing at that point. Who, with whom, what's the target at that point, and think about of sequences of competitions. And start with competing of the strategies first, please. And the brief is the most important. You only get out what you put in.
Maybe we can ask the social scientist or the archaeologist or what they think about this topic. And talking about, what can be done, coming back to my first question.
I mean, listening to all of it, we keep talking about the built heritage, and I'm just trying to think about what about the people? I mean, does it matter if we rebuild the city if all of the people are gone? Like, I think we should focus on the refugees and the displaced persons, and then, then they can come back, and because if the buildings are there and it looks exactly like it did before, does it matter if the people don't still have their heritage there?
Yeah.
I think it's also really challenging since we really don't know when the war will stop. So this is, I think, it raises multiple questions, because if hypothetically the war will stop in 10 years or 20 or 5, this will make a big social changes in the society, and I would just assume that then accordingly the city might be rebuilt differently, just out of the need of the society or out of the need of the people who will live there, because this is exactly the question: for whom to build the city if everyone runs away, and when to build the city, because that's also like no one knows. And that's the social changes that will take place. I think this is a very challenging, and I don't know if any. I'm not a social scientist, so I don't know if it is possible to predict, like, in which way society might change in this kind of situation. Because if I go back to my country, or if I go back to my society, which is very, very, very complex to say who is an Armenian nowadays. It's a very complex question. We have the range of all possible answers, from a post-Soviet mentality until the post-capitalist. I don't know. It's like very, very, very complex. And the same will happen here, of course. And later, I think the question might arise once the war stopped. Maybe then we are like, okay, this is the position 0, and that's where we start on. But I think once there is war and still the process is like the people going outside, I don't know how vital this question even is. This is my
Shipa, you have seen so many countries around the world with heritage destroyed, and the people with their destroyed heritage. What do you think about this issue?
Well, there are many possible mistakes to be made, but I think you should feel the courage to make mistakes.
Depends on the mistakes. It depends on the mistakes.
Yeah, but you should not be too much afraid of making mistakes, and you should not be afraid, it's a general recommendation, and you shouldn't be too much afraid of receiving the blame for having made mistakes, because you will never get blamed if you don't do anything. You
don't make any.
That's very easy. You sit there. We talk. We have an intellectual discussion about how to rebuild or restructure whatever Aleppo. We don't do anything, and in the end of this discussion, we'll receive applause. We won't receive blame for it. And if you don't do anything, you cannot do any mistake. You won't receive blame. But then you have no chance to do something successful. Of course, you should browse the lessons learned process of the past 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, nationally, internationally, and strive for best practice. But You know, if you don't take one step after the other, you won't start the journey. Yeah. I was listening to your terms that you used, all of you, because already in the morning we discussed about what terms we use in our discourse. You were talking about rebuilding and restructuring. Maybe you add in your way of thinking reviving Aleppo, yeah, and re-inhabiting, yeah.
Yeah.
So the first question you raised was what we can do to prevent the destruction of heritage, and of course we can do many things, but then we must discuss politics. But what we can do as urban planners or as architects, nothing. And I'm sitting here as an urban planner or as an architect, and I don't want to discuss politics now. And we know all the reasons why it came to this situation, from all this difficult political impacts and what's going on. This is this question. What we can do for rehabilitation, I guess rehabilitation of Old Town of Aleppo. You said most important are the inhabitants. I wouldn't say today most important is buildings or inhabitants. Maybe important is that this story of 5,000 years of history of developing a city can continue in a way which is not losing the traces. And the traces are on many layers. Of course, there are the economic and the social layers, which are also very important for the future. But at the same time, also the built structures are a part of this memory. So for me, it's a little bit too early to say, okay, this is most important and the other part is less important.
Thank you. But nevertheless, I would like to, before I open the discussion, I see you wait for raising questions. But before I open the discussion, I would like to raise, to repeat my question. You know, we cannot resolve the problems here of power. This is a question, and we have to discuss it, we have to reflect upon it, but we cannot resolve. But if you look at UNESCO, if you look at all the international communities, if you look everywhere, we had yesterday the discussion and the presentation of Professor Hilgert, one of the most famous person in the procedure of developing strategies in rebuilding destroyed heritage, together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Germany. So, but what they all do, what they all want is capacity building. Therefore, I mentioned that, and you mentioned it. But what kind of capacity building? What is it what we need to train? What is it what we need to create? What kind of awareness? What kind of empowerment? I think this is a question we also have to reflect upon. Because otherwise, you are doing more or less, it is also capacity building. What are you doing? You are preparing people. You are presenting things you are doing. So I think to find a way to develop strategies in the big field of capacity building, I think this could be at least a strategy, not to avoid, but at least to create a kind of awareness and kind of empowerment.
I just want to add, when we reflect the current events, we learn the lessons for our future strategies, not for what's going on right now. And when we talk about war, we should always be aware of the fact war is about killing in its core and about destruction. And when you ask the question, what is driving these people when they systematically destroy the cultural heritage and annihilate it? Yeah? What drives people when they systematically rape people? Yeah? I mean, the intention is the physical destruction of societies. Yeah?
Of course.
When we sit here, heritage experts, anthropologists, architects, talking about something in the context of conflict, of armed conflict, we have to keep in mind that the nature of armed conflict is the termination of the enemy and its infrastructure, and to make sure, especially in these asymmetric conflicts, that the enemy wouldn't survive or would be displaced and never return. Yeah?
Yeah, but he is totally right. He is totally right. I cannot give another answer. And of course, when you are speaking about capacity building, then what I can do as an architect, and an architect has worked a lot about rehabilitation, I can try to give my kind of experience to the younger people. No? And I did a lot of research about these post-war reconstruction, rehabilitation, renewals, and so on. And I try to explain it, and also to explain why in which city the decision had been like this or like this. It has, of course, always the reasons. There are always reasons why Kassel had gone this modern way and Freiburg not. There are a lot of reasons, and one has to be aware about these reasons. And that is what we can do in capacity building, but that's always after the destruction had been done.
Problem.
I would like to respond to the dear colleague. I'm an officer of reserve for the German army. So I was also once trained in killing, definitely. And the only thing I would like to answer you is, what does capacity building mean in such a, let's say, environment of, let's say, physical destruction of bodies and identity in building? So we need to be honest. We need to make capacity building in producing love. Yes, love. Love in terms, I love my city. I love my identity. I love my landscape. Proud to be, and proudness. Capacity building in proudness. That means, okay, maybe it's gone. We rebuild it. We need it. We love it. So we need capacity building in such, so let's say, very weak skills, so to speak. We need to do such a kind, and to be honest, mankind and war is a unit. But we still live, we still exist, and we still have a lot of culture, and we still produce culture every day. So this sort of gives hope, and when we are just wondering a little bit because of the last remarks, I think when you talk about Aleppo, I definitely think there is a difference when we talk about Old Town, downtown Aleppo. It's a rather big old city, but there are so many other old towns, and they have, let's say, they occupy 3 or 4% of the whole city, but they have the burden and the load of identity of about 98%. So we do have to treat it different, and very important. And to come back to Aleppo, Aleppo for me is one of the very few cases that the rehabilitation of the downtown city worked with a new ownership. These were not the old owners, and it worked. And I think to create ownership, that means to create capacity building, responsibility, is what I know when it's my plot, and the plot can't be destroyed, because this is an ideal setting of GIS points. Even with a huge bomb, even if there's a hole, you can't destroy my plot. It's my plot because it's written in the papers. It's an ideal structure. An ideal structure is not physical, you can't kill. And it's mine. So, and to build, this is also mean love, proudness, and also maybe ownership. Yeah? And to say, no, it's mine, it's bombed, but it's there. and I can rely on it. And it's let's say, a legitimate title I can ask for, and I can a stakeholdership. And this is what we can do right now and start now.
Maybe only to mention, because that's exactly one part we are trying to start now, something like a fund to, like Aleppo, don't forget your home, so all the refugees or all the people there spread, to contact them, to hold them together intellectually, and to give them the possibility to come back, also to restart a new life there with some European Union funds, or we still are in the finding process, but to actively help them to come back to their old plot. Because right now they are somewhere, maybe they try to start a new life, they are in the 40s, 50s, they have children. I think the people from the children until 20, they will, when they stay here for 3 years, 5 years, they will integrate. They maybe won't come back. They maybe will forget Aleppo or other places. But what will happen with all the people who already had a life in Damascus, in Aleppo, and so on? They probably will come back because they say, no, that was my own home, and I miss the sun, I miss the food, I miss everything, the air, the smell. And so for them, we have, I guess, actively support them to come back, to give them help to go back, to start rebuilding, reconstructing, rehabilitating Aleppo. I believe in the people, that we have to bring them back, and maybe then there could be a possibility for a Freiburg situation, like the people say, no, we believe in this old constellation, and we hold together, and we fight for it. It could be a chance, but only with the people.
Thank you. I would like to open the discussion now to the audience. You look like having questions because we have to finish latest at past. Yeah, is this okay? Right.
Thank you very much, first of all.
You can give us some ideas where you come from, who you are.
Okay, I'm Yara Mwalla. Actually, I'm from Syria, and I'm doing my PhD in TU Berlin in the interrelation between tangible and intangible heritage within the context of all cities. Thank you first, all of you, because really great initiatives and great projects. I feel really, as a Syrian, very thankful for people in Germany thinking already about what's happening in my country and trying to help. What I wanted to say, I don't have really questions, but I have some input or some ideas. I'm doing this, and I'm doing at the same time courses in cultural diplomacy and international relations. And one thing I learned from there is not to be afraid from linking culture to the political arena, and actually not to underestimate the power of culture, the soft power of cultural heritage. And if we reflect that on the situation, I think how to stop the destruction of cultural heritage in Syria is, if we think that UNESCO stands alone, I think we are mistaken. UNESCO is part of the UN, and the UN has many other agencies that works with the security and they have actually army to protect. And I think if we go deeper in that, with an actual lobbying, if the UNESCO manages really to put its strength on the culture, a lot of the damages could have been not happening at this moment. Regarding the rebuilding as well, I think what's very, very important is to think of the rebuilding of the cultural heritage as a process of reconciliation at the same time. Remembering the rebuilding of Mostar Bridge. I think the lessons learned from there are many. One of them is not to go to a top-down strategy, because at the end, yes, they managed to rebuild the bridge. It was great as the new one, but it didn't bring people together, because simply it was done by great countries that they were involved in this and big agencies, and instead of having the people's what they want and what they require for that bridge to rebuild. That's why when we see the opening, it was a huge celebration, but we hardly see one local in that celebration. So part of the rebuilding, it should be done in a very conscious way, that people in Aleppo, and not only Aleppo, people from Aleppo abroad, also people from really Aleppo, that they made the decision to still be there under all these hard circumstances, to be involved in such a thing. And not all of them has left. I mean, yes, we have many people flee, as I did, but as well there are many who are insisting to stay. If it was so impossible for them to stay in Aleppo, they are at least relocated in Damascus or in Latakia or other safer cities in Syria. So that's one thing. The other thing is actually the link between exile and identity rebuilding. The majority of scholar work on identity is done on identity on exile. And I think that's where you start thinking who you are again and what you want. And actually a greater links takes you to who you are, and you start really investing in that. Just to give a small example from the history, the Torah has been written and documented during the Babylon exile. I mean, we have many examples of how the work of identity is always done abroad and not in the city. I think that's all. I don't want to take more time of you. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much. Any other question or comments? No? Oh, yes.
My name is Huda Najjar. I'm from Jordan. I'm an architect. During the lectures or what have been presented, I was a little bit confused because the people of Syria were not mentioned at the beginning. And I think the one who's going to rebuild these cities are the people of Syria, the one who's going to return back to their home. And I think there is a big percentage of people are looking for that day to come back when the war is end. And I think one of the things that we can start doing is to prepare, to conduct these people and prepare a plan with them how they are going to go back when they found there, and how they are going to perceive their home city, Aleppo, other destroyed cities in Syria. And to start communicating with them, learn them how the right steps to rebuild their cities, because Syrians have architects, they have engineers, they have planners, they do have the capacity to rebuild their cities. And the other issue, what I'm concerned about, is the small children, that they left Syria when they are small, and maybe the memory is not still, there's little of memories in their minds. And I think we need to focus on this issue, to aware these kids with the importance of their city and the heritage value of their cities. And that's it. Thank you.
Any other? No, if not, I would like to give... Where?
Raise your arms. Here.
Thank you very much for your precious presentations and also discussions. As you told, and then the destruction of the architecture has a special, particular, like a meaning to destroy the identity and value and everything. And then Dr. Daphia Viezo-Rose provided 9 different classifications of deliberate targeting in her article. So if probably would help to understand what is the intention behind the deliberate targeting in terms of the armed conflict and other religious like war and other things. And I'd like to ask about what is the meaning of the reconstruction. Reconstruction also has a particular meaning, not only the physical like a rebuilding, but also the like a reconstruction of the identity or the social value as well. But I want to know about more what is the main like a theme of the reconstruction of the old Aleppo is kinds of they want to show about their identity, how they are strong enough to fight against the kinds of conflict, or what they want to convey the message through the reconstruction. I want to know about it more.
Thank you very much for this question. It's the same question I wanted to raise. So, if you don't mind, Professor Bala, maybe you can give your answer.
Oh, it's a very difficult question. If you take this case of the old town of Aleppo, now I think there are only very, very few people living there, and the people are spread everywhere. Some are in the country itself, in more safer places. Other ones are, especially the architects and planners, we know them, more or less all of them, or most of them, who had been responsible for the rehabilitation of the old city, and they're everywhere. And also the people from the university. But on the other hand, the university is also still working, and it's also planning. Okay, but in any case, that is what was my last question, for whom one to reconstruct the city. And of course, it cannot be done from the outside. There must be people living there, and they have to ask for themselves, what do we want? These monuments is one question, but the normal standard urban fabric, that is a very, very crucial point. Who will live there? We do not know it. Today, Aleppo is separated in really very hostile areas. They are fighting street against streets. And they are separated, and it's a very, very difficult areas. And that is the reason that I'm also very afraid that it will go on for the next years, because it's so complicated and so complex. So we really do not know for whom now. And that is my main difficulty. And as far as we do not know for whom, we can only more or less do this archive in exile, or do something like capacity building and so on, but we cannot really plan anything. That would be not a problem, no? Even when one should do mistakes, but yes. We lie like a Beirut for a couple of time.
Okay, I just would like to add that from many cities after the war, we know that a lot of damages or destroyment has taken place after the war, with the planning and the development and the reconstruction for the future, not only in Germany, also in Beirut or in other cases. So, knowing this, capacity building also means to inform whoever is responsible and whoever takes part in the future process. And of course, we are addressing this, and of course, we have colleagues in Syria. We always try to integrate them. But this means capacity building, to know about all this structure, which are maybe also under the destroyed buildings. And this was the example I gave you in the presentation about the archive, that I think it's so important to make all this information public available. And this is capacity building, that maybe potential investors or whoever have not the chance to destroy further parts and maybe also deeper parts of archaeological layers which are still under this for new investment. And there's a responsibility and a possibility for us to do something.
This is one of the difficulties we have, and very, very difficult question to answer, rising about reconstruction. It starts with the notion. What do we mean with re? Or do we mean a re? The old city is a palimpsest, as we have seen. It's written many times, many times. So what kind of free are we thinking of? And therefore, it's also for me a difference when we talk about downtown, old town, where history occurred in many ways, or if we talk about, let's say, the new towns, which is only, let's say, one layer or so. At that point, in terms of, let's say, density of culture and value is a difference. So this is the first thing. What do we mean with construction? I mean, our understanding, our notion of Denkmalpflege, das ist English, conservation is very much, let's say, bound and relied on the material substance. But there are different other philosophies. They more ask, what was the idea of the builder? What was the idea of the architect? Maybe even he had some obstacles not to come to the full conclusion of what he wanted or intended. So the circumstances, history or neighbors or money went against him. So I just want to say, what does it mean when we say build? Do we build on ideas or do we build on material substance? So it's very difficult. Nerdinger had a very nice exhibition a few years ago in Munich that was mentioned about the history of Reconstruction / the reconstruction of history. Yeah, that makes us think very much in this direction. And I would really say, I have the problem in the reconstruction. This seems to be a disease going on in Germany right now. Just mentioning Dresden, Berlin, Stadtmuseum, Stadtkastel, Brandenburg, Hohenzollern, and a new a democratic, let's say, elected parliament in there. And it's a wrong Knobelsdorf. It's just mention Braunschweig, a castle. Mentioning Frankfurt, Römerberg, mentioning Hildesheim, and so on and so on and so forth. It's a real disease going on in Germany right now. And for me, my answer is, and I don't have a clear answer, what is the notion and the idea behind reconstruction. I divide very strongly about obeying the principles, and I see a very strong value in this. And at the same time, in terms of resilience, what is the most resilient thing? It's the grid, it's the space, the typology, it's the structural element. And after that, architecture and aesthetics come. And architecture and aesthetics, I would put into the realm of, let's say, of nowadays. And the others I would put into the realm of, let's say, being more of a principal nature. Typology and the models. And even at this clear division I take for myself, I do have some, let's say, excuses. Something like Warsaw, but I would even claim we do have some expressions in the Potsdam discussion and in the Dresden discussion about Leitbauten, guiding buildings. In Dresden, they were using it like the houses which were documented very perfect, we rebuilt them. We have to rebuild them. They didn't succeed. It didn't work. And the Potsdam, they claimed also Leitbauten guiding buildings, but a little bit more clever. They said, which in the structure we are going to rebuild is of a higher value in terms of urban issues like corners or point de vue or stuff like this. And they claim this being the Leitbauten. So the structure, and then the aesthetics, and then some, let's say, examples of the origin buildings. And for me, I'm very close with this because when I think of the Umayyad Mosque and this tower, in Aleppo, I have the impression we simply have to have it back. We need to have it back. So, no question about this. And just to come back to your point, I'm a stakeholder of Aleppo. I love Aleppo, simply. I have friends there. I've been there for many, many years and have been living there and eating there and have friends. But it's also I'm German, and I'm coming from a beautiful town in Dinkelsbühl in Bayern, Bavaria. Yeah? But this is a World Heritage Site. So I may be a stakeholder. I would like to have very sure the Syrian society, the Syrian friends, sure. But I'm also a stakeholder as a German. This is a World Heritage Site, and some of these outstanding points we simply want and need to have back. And in the other, I simply, for me, to answer your question a little bit, I would differentiate between what is a typical thing that we can work, that means, let's say, resilience and stuff like that, and what we should leave to the architects, what we should leave to the designers, what we should leave, and it's a crucial point, to the people. Yeah? But not everything to the people, please not.
Thank you very much. I think that's it. This was a conclusion. And I think, nothing has to be added to what we have heard about it. Thank you very much. Thank you to the whole audience to participate in this very interesting discussion. I always think we need more time to discuss, to raise questions, to answer questions, and sometimes we keep the questions open, ask open questions, and we say goodbye and think about it tomorrow, next day, or in 2 weeks, whatever. So thank you very, very, very much for coming, for being here, for giving the presentations, and for being here for the discussion. I have prepared some small presentations for you. This is for you. This is for you. And for you. This microphone more.
Danke für die Einladung.
This is for you. You have it already. You will have another one. They have it already. Thank you very much. So, thank you to all of you. And